All right, can everybody see my screen? Okay, so
Yes,
yes,
yes.
welcome. Yep, okay, perfect. All right, so welcome to the webinar. Today we're going to be talking about bridging traditional wisdom and modern science and going over a few novel herbs for brain wellness. So this is going to be a relatively quick webinar. It's going to last about 20 minutes, and the purpose of it is to give you some context for a holistic version or a holistic way of looking at brain health and how we can support it using herbs. So the language in this webinar is going to be relatively basic because we're going to set the foundation. And this is going to be the first webinar in a series where we're going to go in and explore more of these concepts in detail. And also, I should introduce myself. My name is Lisa Kowalik, and I'm a nutritionist and kinesiologist, and I work quite a bit with neurological disorders in the health and wellness space, and I use a lot of herbs in my practice. So I'm really excited to share all about this with you guys today. And so on that note, we will get started. All right. So in this webinar, what we're going to focus on is a little bit of the fundamentals of holistic brain health, because when it comes to brain health, the integrative model or the holistic model varies quite differently from the conventional model. So we're going to dive into a little bit about what that looks like. And again, we'll be going into more detail on this as we go through this webinar series, but for now, we're going to set the foundations for that. And then we're also going to go over three herbs. We're going to talk about boswellia, we're going to talk about bacopa, and we're going to talk about ginseng. And we're going to talk about these in relation to brain wellness and brain health. And then we're also going to go over a couple of different formulas and how you can actually implement these herbs into your day-to-day life. And so before we dive into these three herbs, it's really important to talk a little bit about what cognitive health is and what causes cognitive dysfunction or what can cause us to have really healthy and vibrant brains throughout the lifespan. When it comes to supporting cognition, we first need to understand the elements that can actually hinder our brain and hinder our cognition before we can understand how to enhance it. And so we want to begin by actually saying what is cognitive dysfunction and what this actually looks like in our bodies or in our patients in our clinics. And so cognitive dysfunction can be something as simple as brain fog. And when we're experiencing brain fog, this could be a lack of concentration, a lack of focus. We don't feel that clear, and our thoughts are a little muddy. They're not really flowing that well, and our attention can become very scattered. And we can have the brain fog type picture, and then it can go kind of swing all the way to the other end, something like a neurological disorder, such as Alzheimer's, Parkinson's disease, dementia, traumatic brain disorders. And so when we're looking at cognitive dysfunction, it doesn't matter if we're looking at a symptom of, say, brain fog, or if we're looking at a pathological presentation of dysfunctions such as Alzheimer's, there's going to be common threads that are tying the roots of these together. And so today, we're really going to look at what these are and how we can manage the biology in the brain to support a thriving cognition versus a dysfunctioning cognition. And so the main drivers of cognitive dysfunction are neuroinflammation, increased oxidative stress, poor circulation to the brain. And this is very interesting because in the conventional model of medicine, we often think of brain degeneration or cognitive dysfunction stemming from age. The older we get, the less brain cells we have. And that's where we begin to have a breakdown in the function of the brain. But today, we're going to really go over how the piece of neuroinflammation, increased oxidative stress, and poor circulation really set the stage for cognitive dysfunction. And we're going to talk about how we modulate those so that we can enhance our cognitive function. And when we're speaking of enhancing cognitive function and enhancing cognitive capacity, what we're talking about is optimizing the biology to promote focus, to promote concentration, to promote clarity, memory, learning, and intention and retention of the information that's coming into us, coming into our brains, and working towards either preventing a neurological disease or working to mitigate the symptoms of one that's already present. And so this is why it's so great to use herbs as well, because we can use them from the or through the entire spectrum of the brain pathology, whether it is just a symptom of somebody working to optimize or somebody who is actually dealing with a diagnosis. And so, again, as I said, we're going to be really diving into these concepts in future webinars, but that's just the basis and to kind of get the wheels turning and to start thinking of brain health from a holistic standpoint versus the conventional standpoint that we are often taught. And so, on that note, we're going to go into three different supplements or herbals that we can use really to enhance the cognition and enhance our brains. And the reason that we are going to be talking about boswellia, bacopa, and ginseng is because these three have been historically used for brain health for centuries, and there is a huge body of modern research that supports the use that has been utilized through different schools of medicine throughout human history, basically. And then these are also very interesting because when it comes to supporting brain health, we have to take into consideration that the brain is an organ that the body needs to protect. And of course, we need to protect all of our organs in our body, but there's extra protection around the brain because it is so vital and essentially controls every other system in the body. And so these three supplements that we're going to go into, or three herbals, they have the ability to cross something called the blood-brain barrier. And again, we'll be talking more about this in depth, but the reason that these herbals are so potent is because when we're ingesting them orally, they are going into circulation and they are actually going into the brain. And so a lot of different supplements can work on the brain indirectly, but these three are able to go into the neural tissue and have their effects directly in the brain, which makes them extra potent and extra powerful. And this is why they are the focus of this webinar for brain wellness. Got ahead there. Okay, so the first one that we're going to speak about is boswellia. And boswellia is an amazing herb for the brain. It's probably one of the best known ones. And unfortunately, it's not widely used in our Western societies. And so we're really excited to, talk about this and get more clinicians in Canada to be using boswellia because it is phenomenal on its own for brain health, and it works extremely well with other herbs, especially the two other ones that we're going to go into, and work synergistically to make them work even better. And to start, there's a lot to say about boswellia. And again, we'll have different webinars that go into the specifics of boswellia for very specific pathologies or symptoms. But as an overview, boswellia has basically been used for all of human history. And it is particularly revered for its anti-inflammatory properties. And this is going to be really important because inflammation is truly at the base of most pathologies. And as we're going to get into in a little bit here, it is truly the base of any sort of neurological symptom or pathology that we can have. And not only has it been used around the world, but it has been used through different schools of medicine. So it's been used in Ayurveda, in traditional Chinese medicine, and through different types of Middle Eastern medicine for centuries. And what's interesting about is when we start to see patterns throughout the world, we know that there's merit in it. It's not just one school of thought that has started to use it. It comes from all of these schools of thought. And then now in our current world, the school of thought that it is, or the medicine paradigm that it is now in, is integrative medicine. And we can validate this through scientific research. And basically, we can validate what these different branches of medicine have known throughout time. And it's very interesting because boswellia has a long history of use in the Middle East for memory and brain health specifically. And around the world, it also has, but it has been more used in the anti-inflammatory capacity in other schools of medicines. But in the Middle East, they have been using it for memory and brain health. And now science tells us that it is one of the best compounds that we can use for that. And the other traditional uses that boswellia has is wound healing, cognitive health, and pain management is a really big one, gut health, and respiratory health. And the reason that it is so good for all of these things is because the main mechanism of action of boswellia is to reduce inflammation in the body. And because inflammation just drives dysfunction, it has a large range of activities. So that is why it can hit on so many different systems within the body. And of course, as we've discussed, this is a webinar about brain health, about cognitive function, and how we can support the longevity of the brain throughout the lifespan. However, I did want to highlight that because of the anti-inflammatory nature of boswellia, we can use it in so many other things that we will be going into in future webinars, but the clinical indications for boswellia are quite large, and you can use boswellia in anything from, of course, cognitive health to arthritis, asthma. There has been a lot of research on it for respiratory tract health, and, aside from asthma, in the upper respiratory tract infection sphere. It has been used for different digestive conditions, including Crohn's and colitis. And so Boswellia, it just truly is a very well-rounded herb that has several clinical implications due to the fact that it is largely anti-inflammatory. What I was saying too is just to hit on the note of the historical uses, because of course, modern science is kind of the benchmark that, of course, we're going for in this modern day time to see if something is effective or not. But the historical uses of different herbs and, just different types of medicine can really give us a lot of indications. And one of the really cool things about Boswellia is that in the Middle East, for a very long time, mothers or pregnant mothers used to take Boswellia in order to ensure the intelligence of their future children. And so it's one of these old wives' tales that actually has merit in science, which I always just think is something kind of fun and interesting to share. And now we're going to go into how Boswellia actually works in the brain and focus on just the cognitive piece with this. So as we said, Boswellia's claim to fame is its anti-inflammatory properties. And how this works in the body is, well, first of all, Boswellia has four main constituents in it. And so when it comes to herbals, you can use the whole plant, but typically what we do is we extract the most medicinal parts of that, and then we concentrate it and take it orally, and that's how it has its actions in the body. And so the most anti-inflammatory components of Boswellia are called boswellic acids, and we have four of them. And again, we'll break down those four and talk about the specific mechanisms of action in further webinars. But for today, the most important part is just that you know that there are four different boswellic acids that are extremely anti-inflammatory, and they cross the blood-brain barrier, and they work synergistically to reduce neuroinflammation. So neuroinflammation is a fancy word for just inflammation that happens in the brain. So it basically just names the location of inflammation. And because it's able to reduce inflammation directly in the brain, it can promote or it can basically restore a healthy environment in the brain. And not only does it reduce inflammation, it also reduces something called oxidative stress. And so when we're thinking about any sort of symptom and pathology or any tissue that is not going to be functioning at its highest capacity, there is an inflammatory component and an oxidative stress component. And so what Boswellia does is it does reduce the inflammation, and then it also acts as an antioxidant to combat free radicals to ensure that we're having a very healthy environment in the brain. And because these two things underlie several pathologies, by working on them, we can create an environment in the brain that makes it very hard for disease to thrive. And so this is not to say that if you take Boswellia, you can, cure anything. You can't take one herb and cure everything. However, we can work to just create an environment so that the body is better able to support. It has a wide application when it comes to brain specific things that it can basically change. And so down here we have, or you can see, Boswellia is able to increase neuronal survival. This basically is a fancy term for it can ensure that the brain cell has a longer lifespan. So in the conventional paradigm of medicine, we're usually taught that you have a finite number of brain cells, and through the lifespan they decline. And then that's why we start to see things such as memory issues, lack of focus, and just all of the precursors to the diseases that we see of the brain. However, this is not true. We do make brain cells for our entire life. And we can also not only make new brain cells, but we can keep our brain cells alive for a longer period of time when they are not exposed to inflammation or oxidative stress. And so through these two mechanisms, we're able to extend the lifespan of our brain cells, which of course is just going to be able to keep our brain healthy and thriving throughout the entire lifespan. And then next, Boswellia is able to support healthy synaptic functions. And this basically is the connections in the brain and how the brain is talking to each other. And I always like to explain synaptic connections like Wi-Fi. If we have really fast Wi-Fi, communication is extremely fast. We're relaying all of the information in a very time-sensitive manner, and everything is working coherently. When we have Wi-Fi that is not strong, what happens is the information is not going back and forth as readily. We might be missing some things. Everything is not coherent, and it doesn't really work that well. And in an unhealthy brain or a brain that is exhibiting symptoms, we typically have poor synaptic connections. And this is equivalent to the Wi-Fi that's not working so well. And when we can add Boswellia into the mix, we begin to have more healthy communication. And not only do we fortify the synapses that already exist, we are able to create more. So we have more roots for the same thing. So, for example, if you're driving and all of a sudden there's a traffic jam, there's a car accident, instead of waiting there, you can then take a detour. So the more synaptic connections you have, the more easily you are to detour when something backs up. And so the more connections we have, the more robust brain we have, the better we're able to concentrate, the better we're able to think, the better we're able to process. And this becomes very important when we are looking just for longevity, supporting a brain, whether it's, studying, working at school, or when we're trying to remedy or mitigate an already established pathology. And again, we'll be going into that more in future webinars. And then because of the inflammation piece and the oxidative stress piece, we are able to enhance just general cognitive activity. And so this is going to be really important for the populations that are just wanting to optimize their brain. There's nothing really wrong. They just want to be able to think better, think more clear, have more brain power for tasks such as work or school or just getting through life. And so the general cognitive enhancements are going to be intelligence. And this isn't to say that Boswellia can increase IQ, because unfortunately, as great as that would be, that's not something that can happen. But what it can do is it can help us to reach our potential and access our innate intelligence that is often blunted just by all of the inflammation that is going on in the brain, all of the oxidative stress that we're exposed to on a daily basis. Basically, it just helps us to live at our highest potential. And then also through increasing free or antioxidants in the brain and reducing the inflammation, we see an increase in learning, we see an increase in memory, and this can be short-term and long-term memory, clarity and reasoning abilities. And then it's extremely neuroprotective. And this last little bit of how Boswellia interacts with the brain is a topic for another day, but it fortifies the intestinal barrier, which is something really important in the holistic view of medicine, is that all of the systems in the body speak to each other. And when you impact one system, you impact another. And when it comes to the gut and the brain have a bidirectional relationship and they talk to each other. And anytime there is dysfunction in the gut, we see it in the brain. And so the fact that Boswellia can go in and fortify the intestinal barrier and really support gut health and the gut microbiome, it is having this really amazing and not so much talked about indirect impact on the brain. So when it comes to Boswellia, this is going to be generally used in Alzheimer's, which is, quite a advanced stage of memory loss and of course accompanied by other things. But there is a lot of research on using Boswellia to slow the progression of Alzheimer's and to mitigate the symptoms of it and make them less. It also is used in mild cognitive impairment. There's research on it in mild traumatic brain injury. And so this would be something like a concussion, the acute healing phase of a concussion, or the long remedying of concussion symptoms that are lingering. It's often used in memory, in brain fog, and then the key piece here for longevity is that it's often used in the prevention of neurodegeneration. So that's kind of Boswellia in a nutshell. That was a lot of information, but this is why it's so good. And this is why it's also going to be the base of a lot of the formulas that we talk about, just because it has such a full spectrum of basically the bioactive compounds in it work full spectrum in the brain. And then the second herb we're going to touch on is Bacopa. And Bacopa is another very interesting herb that has been widely used in Ayurveda medicine, in traditional Chinese medicine, and pretty much just across the board for centuries. And again, is also validated by science. And it is a tropical plant, and it is historically has been used for memory and information processing and also retention of new information that we're bringing in. And it, like Boswellia, enhances the synaptic connections, which again is just really fortifying the brain and making it easier to think and perform activities of daily living. And it also offers a lot of neuroprotection. And so this basically means that it's going to go in across the blood-brain barrier, and it's going to be able to protect our brain cells from any insults that might be coming at it. And the one thing with the brain is that it is a very metabolically active organ. And that means anytime we have something that is metabolically active, we are going to have waste products. And normally the body clears these out very efficiently, but we still want to have some insurance against all of those waste products. And so something like Bacopa is going to be really good at doing that. And then that is just going to protect the brain cells from death. It's going to protect those connections and ensure that our brains are just working throughout the lifespan. And then something else interesting about Bacopa is it helps to regulate neurotransmitters. And like Boswellia, it also reduces neuroinflammation through different pathways. And so typically, Bacopa is used for enhancing just regular cognitive function, attention, memory, focus. And there's a large body of research on it for ADHD. And it's also useful in mood disorders such as anxiety or depression, which again aren't usually thought about as brain diseases or like not physical brain diseases, but they do have a root in our neurochemistry. And so we can also modulate those pathways through herbs and with stress. And when it comes to, the clinical populations that are going to use it, of course, like I just said, ADHD, mood disorders, anybody who's looking to prevent neurological disorders. And then it's also really great for short-term memory. And so we can use it for students studying for exams, or if you've got a big project at work and you really need a extra focus and you just need the extra capacity in your brain to take in information in large amounts, Bacopa is going to be really great for that. And then the last herb that we are going to speak about, ginseng, specifically Panax ginseng, because there are a few different ginsengs. And so we want to make sure that we're being very specific and not just generalizing all the ginsengs. And when it comes to ginseng, the main constituent we have here is the ginsenosides. And again, this is just like the boswellic acids. It's the part of the plant that we go in, extract, and take in a higher dose to elicit effects that we want. And what ginseng does is promote something called neuroplasticity. And this is really important because this is how we learn and how we grow and how we take new experiences into our lives and solidify them and make them habits. And so there is a lot of overlap between the synaptic connections and neuroplasticity, and a little bit of the same, a little bit different. And so when it comes to really supporting neuroplasticity, all of the herbs we've spoke about are going to help in some capacity, but ginseng is just going to do it in a very unique way, which is why we want to make sure that we're including it when we're thinking of how do we support the brain throughout the lifespan. And then like the others, it also supports memory retention and focus, and it is a very potent neural antioxidant. And so again, it's just going to go in and reduce that oxidative stress in the brain, just like Boswellia, but again through a different pathway. And that is one of the really important things with herbs is we often have a lot of overlap in the actual action that they're doing or the thing that they are changing, for example, oxidative stress. However, they do it through different pathways. And so because they do it through different pathways, we're able to have a bigger reduction in something. So if we're using the oxidative stress example, if we have a lot of oxidative stress, if we're using one intervention, which say is Boswellia, it will take it down a certain, and then if we're adding something else in, we can further take it down. And so these herbs are going to come in, they're going to work together, and they're going to go through different pathways to have the same action, but they're going to amplify the outcome, if that makes sense. And so ginseng is typically indicated in cognitive function, mental fatigue, focus, and in memory. So now we've talked about these herbs. We know more or less how they work in the brain, or that at least they do some really wonderful stuff in the brain, and that the use of them can promote longevity in the brain and can, help us to keep our minds sharp throughout the lifespan. Now we want to figure out, okay, we have this information. How do we put this into practice in real life or into our clinics with our patients or for ourselves? And that is where Kondor Pharma comes in. And so Kondor, very interestingly, is the Persian name for Boswellia. And this is because the base of every one of the products in this line is going to be Boswellia. And that is for all of the reasons that we spoke about and several that we have not spoke about yet, but we will. And these are basically Kondor is a company that has taken these ancient herbal extracts or ancient herbs and extracted them and put them into a supplement that is fit for modern life, which is really important because even though we know that the constituents and these herbals have worked for centuries, our bodies are at a different place in time. And so oftentimes we're going to need more than we could get with just, simply having the plant. We really need to go in and extract them. And Kondor is a pioneer in the science of these three herbs and how to extract them, how to use them for optimizing human health. And the reason that the Kondor products are so great is because there's clinical trials on these actual products. And so this is very unique because most times we have a nutrient or an extract and we can see all of the research on it, which is great. And then Kondor has gone one step further and done the research on their actual product. So they have taken the research that has already been done and then applied it to these specific products to make sure that they are doing what they are meant to be doing, which is quite neat. And it is a true nutraceutical. The team at Kondor are neuroscientists, PhDs, and everybody has a really strong scientific background. And yes, so all the research is obviously led by researchers and scientists, and we will also be going more deep into the research on these and how they can support and to basically also, so when it comes to the way that we extract, typically we see herbs in tincture form. And this is a question that is often had, why a supplement or a pill versus a tincture? And this is because a tincture takes the plant and extracts all of the compounds out of it. And then this is what you're left with an amazing product that is really great in some situations. But for our modern day life, where you need something a little bit stronger. And so how we get around this is by extracting the same things from a tincture, but adding more to it. And so you can have a higher dose in a capsule than you can have in the tincture, which can elicit a faster effect and a more therapeutic effect. And all of the Kondor products are standardized to a high percent that we know for sure in the research is going to have a biological effect in the body to the extent that we want it to. And this is also one thing in the research when it comes to different products is that, for example, someone could take a boswellia tincture and they actually don't notice anything. And it's because the dose is just too low. And so it still is doing something on a physiological level, but it's not perceivable just because of the amount of stuff that we have going on in our modern environments and how that interacts with our body. We often need something that is just going to be stronger to have a more pronounced effect. And so I'm going to be sharing with you two formulas, and I'll just go over these super quick. They are on the Kondor website. You can go and look up all of these, get a little more information, and look at the research. But again, we'll be going through this later. So the first one is called Strowell, and this is for brain health, as we've talked about. Of course, both products are going to be geared towards that. And this one contains boswellia, the ginseng, and then two supportive nutrients, the vitamin C and the lutein. And we'll not touch on those today, but they also work very synergistically with the herbs to have a very beautiful effect in the brain. And basically, this formula is going to support brain and neuronal health. It's going to aid on cognitive function, reduce mental fatigue, protect your brain cells. It like all of the products that contain the boswellia, they're going to be helpful in modulating neuronal inflammation. And what's really unique about this product is it has been clinically tested in stroke recovery and TBI recovery. And so typically when we talk about TBIs, we are talking about concussion type symptoms or major or minor concussions. And then the next one is Memowell, and this one is Boswellia and Bacopa, and it's primarily designed for memory support. And so this could be somebody who is just wanting to keep their memory sharp with no symptoms, somebody who is trying to learn stuff, and then people who are dealing with pathological memory symptoms such as Alzheimer's, dementia, or age-related cognitive decline. And again, it's just supporting overall cognitive function and memory. And we can use it in Alzheimer's, we can use it in dementia. And there's been some really interesting research done on it. And this actual product has been researched in Alzheimer's, and it's shown a great reduction in symptoms. And it is the correlation between the Boswellia and Alzheimer's is also largely why Kondor exists, because they realize that the potency of these products can reduce inflammation in such a profound way, which aligns with their goal of just making the aging process easier, healthier, and more enjoyable for everyone. So that is all I have for you today. I apologize for clicking to the slide prematurely, but thank you so much for attending. And if there are any questions, I would be really happy to answer them.
Thank you, Lisa. It was really interesting, and I myself am really eager to see what's going to happen in next sessions, and I'm really excited to see